A patient came in with a severe asthma exacerbation and was intubated and admitted to the intensive care unit. So I kind of formulated my plan and then called my MD on call, who was also the boss, and kind of went through my plan, and he told me what to change or what to keep. And then the patient, a few days later, we were rounding and she was leaving the hospital, and he was like, you did that. And that was such an incredible feeling to know that I was able to make an impact on that patient's life. And I think from then on, I was like hooked with critical care. I loved it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of #Skinthusiast, the podcast. On today's episode, I am answering one of my most commonly asked questions, which is how did I become a dermatology PA? What is a dermatology PA? All the tips and tricks I have, all the advice I have for anybody who is potentially interested in a career in dermatology, especially cosmetic dermatology. We're going to cover it all today. So let's start first with what is a PA? So a PA is a physician assistant, and we are licensed to practice medicine in all 50 states in the United States. And we are there to diagnose, treat, give education on medical problems, depending on what specialty we work in. So the training is a generalized training, and then we get more specific training through clinical rotations, and then whichever specialty we decide to then work in, we get that kind of on-the-job training for our specific specialty or subspecialty. And one of the most common questions I get is, what kind of schooling do you need to become a PA? And so you have to start off with a bachelor's degree. So mine is in biology. And then after you do your 4-year bachelor's degree in college, you then apply to your master's program, which is your PA program. So there are various programs all across the United States, and they have varying lengths, some as small as 24 months, some go to 3+ years. It really depends on the program. And as I mentioned, the schooling that you receive in your PA program is very generalized. So we learn medicine, general medicine. So in school, we have different sections where we're learning about each specialty, but they're certainly not covering cosmetic dermatology, I can tell you that. So depending on your program, you have various rotations during your second year. So usually there is a core rotations that are required for every single school to follow. So those are going to be things like pediatrics, obstetrics and gynecology, family medicine, internal medicine, general surgery, psychiatry, all those that are required. And then you usually have a certain number of electives. In my case, there were 2. So I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but that is the general schooling that you need. When I was in college, I actually was initially a political science major on a pre-law track. So I was studying for the LSAT, and I had this aha moment that I didn't actually want to become a lawyer. I think I decided, I'm putting that in quotes, that I wanted to become a lawyer in high school. And it was just something that I never, as I became an adult and the years passed, I never looked back to really determine if that was actually still what I wanted to do. And when I did some more self-reflection, I decided that I really wanted a career in medicine. So I completely did a 180 and switched from my political science major to a biology major. It's completely different coursework. I was taking lots of biology, genetics, chemistry, organic chemistry, anatomy and physiology, all of those classes that are required for a postgraduate degree in medicine. I wasn't quite sure yet which way I was going to take it. I actually didn't even know what a PA was until college, and my boyfriend, now my husband, we met when I was 17, but his sister is a few years older than us, and she became a PA in orthopedic surgery. So that was the first time I ever heard about being a PA and what they could do, and kind of the draw to that versus becoming a medical doctor. So once I spoke with her and did a little bit more research on the field, it was kind of clear to me that that's the route I wanted to take. And I know that there's always a lot of questions about why someone makes that decision. And for me, the biggest thing was the ability to transition specialties. So I knew even then that I wanted to start my career in some sort of general medicine because it fascinated me, but I knew myself realistically that long term that wasn't the goal. And even at this young age, I had a real passion for skincare. I was one of those people who in middle school was doing my Clinique 3-step system. So I was really passionate about skincare. So dermatology was on my radar, but I never imagined that my career would take such a skincare focused focus. I never imagined that even a career in dermatology, there'd be so much overlap with actual skincare. And we'll get to that later. So that was kind of what led me to the decision to choose PA over medical doctor. And so I continued with this kind of heavy science load, a lot of these, virology, parasitology, all of these classes that were really of so much interest to me. I found the subject matter so interesting. And I also worked in a virology lab on campus at this time. So I often get questions about like what was my work and volunteer work that led me to acceptance into PA school, because each year it's more and more and more competitive. And I applied to PA school in 2014 or 2013. So it's been 10 years at least. And it was really competitive even then. So I can only imagine how that's changed as the field has continued to grow. But one thing that I think did help me was my work in a virology lab, kind of working on mass spectrometry and some of these like more detailed work really allowed me to kind of broaden my application, because I don't think it was a super common area of work for applicants. And then of course I also did volunteer at a local children's hospital to help tutor the kids who were in their long-term getting treatment. And I did not have any hands-on clinical experience during my undergraduate years. So no actually working hands-on with patients, like in a medical setting. So that's what was lacking from my application. My grades were pretty good. I get this question a lot too. I think my overall GPA was maybe like a 3.7, and my science GPA, which is the most important, was a 3.8. So they were decent. I had decent grades. Again, I know that things have changed since then, but even then, some of that probably wouldn't have been high enough to get into some of the programs. After I graduated undergrad with my bachelor's degree in biology, I started working as a patient care technician on an orthopedic floor at a local hospital. So my job here, I would work 8 to 12 hour shifts, and I would help bathe patients, help change patients, change dressings. I would help ambulate patients, get them ready for discharge. It was not the most glamorous work, but I learned so much from the nurses there. It was really a very rewarding job. And during that time is when I started applying to PA school. So that kind of checked the box of my patient care experience. And I started applying to schools in Florida because my husband, boyfriend at the time, was graduating from his graduate degree in Ohio. So he graduated architecture school while I was graduating undergrad, because we were a few years apart. So he decided he was going to take a job in Florida. We decided we were going to move together. And so I started applying to jobs down here, or to PA schools down here in South Florida. I applied to a few different programs. Ultimately, I went to my first interview and I was accepted before I even heard back on interviews on any of the other programs, because one thing about PA school is there's not like a standardized start and end time like there is with medical school. So some of the programs start at different times of the year, and this specific program started in January. So I heard back from them way before I even had interviews for any of the schools that started in May or June. So I just accepted it. I wanted to get things done as soon as possible. Probably looking back, I would have gone to more interviews just to see like what these other schools had to offer, but I was just so excited about getting through the coursework and starting my career after so long being in school that I went with the first one I was accepted to. And ultimately, it was a really good experience. I will say that one thing I noticed throughout my rotations in PA school is that all the schools have their positives and negatives. I was lucky to be at a school where during rotations, preceptors always made mention that they liked working with the students from our program. I think they just prepared us well for those rotations, which always made me feel good. But even like the most prestigious schools that were around, they all had their pros and cons. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the program itself. I can also say that no one cared where I went to PA school. They cared about my experience when it came to jobs and my enthusiasm and my willingness to learn. So I don't think it's that big of a deal where you decide to go. I think I'm more so saying this for people who are maybe only getting into one or two schools. Don't worry about it. I mean, you got in, that's what's important. It's become so competitive that you're not going to get into every program. So don't be discouraged if you don't get into the exact program that you want. It really doesn't matter that much down the road because the curriculum and the testing and everything is so standardized. So during PA school, I've always been a pretty decent test taker my entire life. And I've always really enjoyed studying, which I know is a weird thing to say, but there's something about the organization of the outlines and the color coding that I actually really enjoyed studying. And it also helps when you enjoy the information. And learning about medicine was actually so fascinating to me. Obviously, that's why I chose to do it with my life. So it really wasn't that bad of an experience. It is a lot of work. So my program was 5 days a week, sometimes 12 hours a day. And then certain semesters, we actually had classes on Saturdays too. So sometimes it was 6 days a week. You know, I would get home from school late in the evening, and then I would scarf down some dinner and then hit the books and start studying. The one thing that is really difficult about the program is the pace of it. You learn a lot very, very quickly. So while in high school I could study for a test for a week or more, in PA school, you usually only had about a day or two to study for a test because you had another one. I mean, sometimes we would have an exam every single day in different subjects. So you don't have a lot of time to prepare, and you have to find the best way that your mind learns. Like, that is absolutely key to your success in PA school, is learning how to learn this information, how to study, like what is best for you. I always studied way better alone. I didn't really like studying in groups until right before the test when we would quiz each other, because sometimes, you know, someone would focus on one thing that you didn't necessarily focus on, and it was good. Every time we took a test, I would get one right because of some conversation that happened immediately before that about the test, where we would talk about what we had learned. So I definitely think that was helpful for me, but the bulk of my studying was done alone, head down, no music. Like, that is just how I studied. And like I said, outlines, because there's so much information in each exam. And I don't say this to scare you guys, but I think you have to prepare yourself. They say that PA school is like trying to drink from a fire hydrant because it comes at you so fast. There's no way you can memorize or learn every single word or every single topic. You have to decide what you think is going to be most important, and you have to start to make these associations in your head so that you can learn and build on your knowledge from subject to subject, week to week, because it all builds on each other. So after the first year is absolutely the hardest year. It is the people that you go to PA school with become your family because you don't see anybody else. We were not allowed to work. You could not work. You couldn't physically work, but you also basically had to promise that you wouldn't, because it really does. It's more than a full-time job. It takes up all of your time, and it's really not fair when you're giving that time elsewhere. So I'll talk a little bit about how we lived during this time, since I wasn't able to work, a little bit later. But the first year is absolutely the hardest part. And then you go into second year where you're doing your clinical rotations, which is still hard, but it's a different level of freedom because you're not head in your book 12 hours a day every single day. You get to be actually with patients and getting hands-on experience, and it's a lot more exciting, a lot more fun. And you change rotations about every 6 weeks, so it's always something new and exciting. You're always going to different places, meeting new people, meeting different providers, learning the style that you like from the physicians and PAs that you're working with, how you like taking little bits and pieces from everybody about the kind of provider that you want to be, and also seeing the things that you don't want to be in providers. So that was definitely a really fun year. And as I mentioned, you have to go through all of those core rotations, and then you usually get a couple of electives. And for me, I did cardiothoracic surgery as an elective and dermatology as an elective. My derm elective was about 50-50 cosmetic and general, which was exciting. Sometimes it's hard to find an elective rotation with somebody who also does cosmetics, so that was really exciting for me. But as you can see by my choice in rotations, I really wasn't sure which way I was going to take my career. I really had an interest in more critical medicine. And so as my PA school journey came to an end, I was studying for the boards exam, which, what I will say, everybody studies differently. We graduated right before Christmas time. So obviously it's the holidays. I told myself I was going to be studying throughout the holidays, but it didn't work out that way. And what I kept telling myself was, I've been studying for this exam for the last 2 years. Every single exam I've taken in school is in preparation for this big, larger exam. And ultimately, that paid off. I had my exam on, I think it was January 7th, so a week after the start of the new year. I studied a little bit that week, but not as much as I would have wanted to, just because we were coming off the holidays, and was fine. I left there feeling like I failed. I remember calling my friend Rick on my way home and saying, I failed that exam. And him and my other friend who took it on the same day were like, really? I didn't think it was that bad. And I was like, oh, now I really feel like I failed because no one else is worried about it. And I remember going to the mall on my way home because I was like, I just need to make myself feel better. I'm going to buy myself something. Like, Amy, it's no big deal. You'll retake the test. Like, it happens all the time. And then I got my score and I passed, which was great. And then I actually got a call from the program director later that year. And he said that I had received the highest score of my class. He's like, there are a few people who are still have to take it, but they're not people that we would expect to score super high. And so I only tell you this story because it goes to show you it's sometimes the times where we have the least faith in ourselves that things end up working out in our favor. And it doesn't matter what your score is on this exam, right? It just matters if you passed or failed. I don't remember what that number is. I couldn't even tell you. I'd have to look it up. I've never been asked on a job interview what my score was or where I scored in relation to my classmates. It's just nice to know that sometimes when you doubt yourself the most, things end up working out in your favor. This episode is brought to you by, well, me. Skinthusiast.com is your one-stop shop for all things skin, hair, and beauty. I have countless blog posts to educate you on all the skin concerns and most common skin questions I receive. We also have a complete skincare basics guide on our shop page, as well as the cutest In My Skin era crew necks. If you want to support the show, please head over to skinthusiast.com/shop, and don't forget to rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. As I was ending school, a friend of mine, I was paired with her because she was in the year above me, and I was paired with her as like a quote unquote mentor. And she was amazing. Her name was Devin. Devin, hi, if you're listening to this. She's also in cosmetic dermatology now, which is funny. But she was working in the ICU in critical care, and she really liked it. And she was like, hey, we're hiring. If you want me to set it up, an interview with my boss or get you in contact with him, I can. And so I met with him, had an interview. I think, if I remember correctly, he offered me the job on the spot. And he was really good at hiring new grads and just training them from scratch. That was like what he liked to do. It was really like the first 6 months of that job were really like a residency. He was just very hands-on teaching and really good at that. So that was my first job. I worked in critical care. I always get a lot of questions about starting salary. So I will tell you guys, my starting salary in the ICU was $105,000 for the first 6 months because that was the quote training period. Obviously, you're brand new, you're green, you're not going to be managing a critical care unit on your own. And then after those 6 months, the salary went up to $120,000. It was a very taxing job. We would work 7 night shifts in a row, 7 12-hour shifts in a row, but then you would get 7 days off. So there was this really nice lifestyle balance there. But it was like perfect for being young and hungry and having a ton of energy. But I will say my skin has never been worse in my entire life because I was so stressed out, staying up all night because I was working, living on caffeine and energy drinks, and probably not having the best diet, not having the best sleep patterns. But I did feel fulfilled. I loved that job. I remember the first time I was still in training. No, I had to be off training because I was there by myself. And a patient came in with a severe asthma exacerbation and was intubated and admitted to the intensive care unit. And so I kind of formulated my plan and then called my MD on call, who was also the boss. There are many MDs, but it so happened that the one on call that night was my boss, and kind of went through my plan, and he told me what to change or what to keep. And then the patient, a few days later, we were rounding and she was leaving the hospital, and he was like, you did that. And that was such an incredible feeling to know that I was able to make an impact on that patient's life. And I think from then on, I was like hooked with critical care. I loved it. I loved the adrenaline rush of it. I loved the puzzle of like getting a new patient coming into the emergency department, and then we're consulted because the patient's going to be going to the intensive care unit, and just seeing the puzzle before me of the patient, the labs, the vitals, the imaging, trying to piece together what happened to get this patient in such a state, and then implementing a plan to fix it. It's like, even now, it makes me smile because there is not a feeling like that in the world. I learned so much during that time, but I knew that it wasn't sustainable long term. It was taxing mentally and physically, and I also knew one day I wanted a family, and I also had this nagging passion of skincare and dermatology that just really, from the moment I started school, I knew was going to be my end goal. I just didn't know how long between then and now. I knew I wanted to practice general medicine first. And ultimately, that there was an opportunity that came up when I had only been working for three years, I think, in critical care, that I could not pass up. It was my dream job. There was one office, the office I still practice today, Bauman Cosmetic and Research Institute in Miami. It's incredibly well known all across the country. The dermatologist I worked for, Dr. Leslie Bauman, is incredible. Like, she is the skincare guru. I'll talk more about her resources later because I think she's an amazing person to follow if you want to get into the industry. But this job opportunity came up at this clinic that really was a dream for me. I never thought I'd be able to work there. And I went to an interview there and I was offered the job, and ultimately I took it. And I happily took a pay cut because at this time I had gotten a few raises in my first job. Happily took a pay cut. The good thing about cosmetic dermatology is a lot of times there's revenue sharing. So once you get started in your career, you can start to make more money in that way. But that didn't even matter to me. I was just so happy to have a job that truly, like, my dream job. I was so thrilled. And by no means was the pay bad, right? Like, it was still great pay. But after accruing so many raises, after already a pretty high starting salary at my last job, it definitely, me and my husband had to have those conversations of, how are we going to make changes to our lifestyle in the meantime until you build your business. So it was a really, really exciting time. As I mentioned, I'm still there now because I can't imagine, like, honestly practicing anywhere else. It still is my dream job. And while we're on the topic of money, I often get asked how I paid for PA school. That was one of the questions that came in from the audience, and I definitely had to have loans. So I was lucky enough not to have any loans during undergrad, which was incredible, but I did have to have loans for graduate school, and I took out the maximum amount because I also had to live on those loans because we were just two people living in Miami, a very expensive city, and my husband was just starting his career as an architect, which they don't get paid that great in the beginning. So we definitely needed that living money for the two of us in such an expensive city. I don't regret taking out that much money. I think it would have been probably more beneficial for me to just put my head down and not spend any money in that time and just take out what I needed for the school tuition itself. Because ultimately I left with, I think, I have to look at the exact numbers. I'll put them in the show notes if I can find them before this airs. But I think like $140,000 in loans I left with. And at the end, actually, there was a finance guy who came in and spoke with us about options like refinancing. And I'm going to get into that a little bit because it's not for everybody, but it is something that I think was the right choice for me. So I did decide to refinance my student loans. Now, one thing to know about refinancing is that when there are sort of government leniencies like we've seen over the last 5 years with COVID and other things that have been implemented, which basically gave people time off from having to pay their student loans without interest, you do not get those benefits if you have refinanced your loans because they're no longer government loans. However, looking back, I still think it was by far the best decision I made when it comes to managing my student loans. I initially refinanced with SoFi, and I don't remember the exact interest rate, but I think I chose maybe a 10-year term, repayment term. Basically, and many times when you refinance, the shorter the term, you can sometimes get a lower interest rate, and so that reduces the total spend. And when you do refinance, they will often give you the total amount that you're paying in the 7, 10, 20, 30 year, and it is astounding what you pay in interest if you take 20 to 30 years to pay off your loans, like tens of thousands of dollars, and that made me ill, like made me sick to my stomach. So when I refinanced, I picked a shorter term. I think I picked 10 years the first time because I didn't have a job or I hadn't started my job. I didn't know what financially things were going to look like. Again, we live in a very expensive city. So I chose that. And I think my payment was My initial payment was definitely over $1,000 a month. It was probably my single greatest expense that I had at the time. But I did that on purpose because I wanted to pay it off sooner. So when I started my job, a lot of my friends who started that same job, which again was like a relatively good paying job for a new grad, everyone was getting new cars and in luxury cars, and I just kind of like kept all my old stuff. Now, I'm not a saint. I like to splurge. I've always had an eye for luxurious things my entire life, but I put off a lot of those big decisions like a new car in hopes of paying off those loans faster. Then I think it was post-pandemic or immediately during the pandemic, when interest rates dropped extremely low, I refinanced again to take advantage of that low interest rate, and I picked an even shorter term. And so my payment went up because I picked such a short term, so it was close to $2,000 a month at this time. But now, fast forward, I'm, really 4 or 5 years into my career. Financially, things are different than they were when I first graduated. And again, I just kept my head down. I still put off that purchase, was still driving a Subaru happily. Not that matters, doesn't matter what car you drive, but like that was the way my head was working. Like, I'm not going to buy these huge purchases because I want to prioritize paying off my student loans. I don't want it hanging over my head accruing interest. And so I was just able to pay those off late last year, the whole loan. So it feels so great knowing that I don't have it. I know that some people choose to pay the minimum for years and years, and I'm not a finance expert. I don't know how the pros and cons of those things. I just know for me, it was hanging over my head. And when I saw the amount of money I would be paying in interest, I was like, no way, that money could be better spent elsewhere. So I'm just going to buckle down, put my head down, and pay them off as fast as I can. And again, I'm in a 2-income household. I didn't have undergraduate loans to compound on those, so I kind of had that luxury to prioritize it. It was my single greatest expense, even when you consider like cutting my mortgage in half, my husband paying half, me paying half. It was still more expensive than my half of our mortgage, which is a home. So it was an extensive payment, but I'm so glad that I did it now, looking back. What are my tips for those who want to work in dermatology? So I get this question at least 10 times every time I do a Q&A. It's a very common question, which I understand because it is a very highly sought after specialty to work in dermatology, especially cosmetic dermatology. A lot of people want to get their foot in the door. So you have to understand that these employers have kind of their pick of many candidates, and a lot of times they will quote unquote require experience, which can be difficult if you want to break into the field and you have no experience. So this is my general recommendation that I give to everybody. If you're already working in medicine, especially if you're in like primary care, you probably have access to some of the reps who come in with their acne topicals, psoriasis topicals, eczema topicals, rosacea topicals, because a lot of those things are sometimes prescribed by primary care physicians. So if you're in that setting and you have access to those representatives, make friends with them. One, not only to learn about these drugs because they're incredibly amazing and efficacious for your patients, but they often have kind of an in with a lot of the other offices and other reps too, who might have derm offices in their portfolio. And oftentimes the reps will know when positions are coming available, especially if they're reps that have been friendly with the dermatologist for many years. So that's something to just kind of get on their radar, so that you can be informed if anything comes up from their side. Also, you can join, some states allow non-derm providers to join like their PA associations or the NP associations in derm specifically. So you can look into that and go to those conferences. That's a great way to meet people, not only other PAs who might either be hiring or there might be a position open in their practice. Also, a lot of the speakers there, dermatologists who may potentially be hiring. That's a great way to meet people. Attend rep dinners. So when dinners come up for the drugs I mentioned that have to do with dermatology, attending those dinners to learn about the new medication and also network with other providers is a great option. You can also join lists, like Titan Aesthetics is one that I used before I was in the field. And I know a lot of friends who use them too. Basically, they have job postings, but also a lot of resources for people who want to break into the space too, even beyond just open jobs. And then I would also say still apply to the job, even if it says experience required. I obviously didn't have experience when I got my position, but I think just showing your willingness to learn and how enthusiastic you are about the field goes a long way. Also, there are a lot of providers who are willing to teach and even prefer to teach someone who's new to the field because they can kind of mold you into the provider they want you to be and kind of teach you their preferences rather than having somebody else who comes in with their own preferences already in place. So don't underestimate the benefit of being either a new grad or inexperienced in that specific field, because a lot of providers do like to hire like that. I would say a way to not only prepare yourself and put yourself in the best position for when you do hopefully start a job, but also to show your enthusiasm is to educate yourself on your own as much as you possibly can. I will leave a lot of my favorite resources, my favorite books for not only general dermatology, but also cosmetic dermatology and cosmeceuticals, which is skincare ingredients, down below. There are some fantastic textbooks on these subjects, and you can really educate yourself so well so that when you do have an interview or you do find yourself in a conversation with one of these dermatologists or providers, you can really show them your enthusiasm and how much you've taken your own time, your own money to invest in your passion. And I'm often asked my thoughts on injectable courses. I will say I don't think that they're very beneficial. I have never really met anyone, and I'm sure there's plenty out there, but I've never personally met a provider who felt like it really got them closer to their job in cosmetics. A lot of cosmetic training is really done on the job. So definitely, if you're on a budget, it's not where I would put my money. But if you're just interested in learning more about the field and kind of getting your hands dirty a little bit, I don't think that they're detrimental in any way. Next question, how did I educate myself so much on skincare ingredients? So it's actually a common misconception that you get this like vast skincare education in your dermatology coursework in grad school. You do not. We're learning about medical conditions as it pertains to dermatology. We're not learning about cosmeceutical ingredients that you find on the shelf. So that, and this goes for most providers. You can listen to other episodes on this podcast from dermatologists that I've had on here, and they will tell you the same thing. There's not a robust cosmeceutical education in residency for them, and certainly not in med school. So it is a lot of taking matters into your own hands and educating yourself on these ingredients. That being said, I started with my doctor, Dr. Leslie Bauman's cosmeceutical and skincare ingredient textbook, which is by far, I think, the absolute best place to start if you're a novice. It's really going to give you the basics of the most common skincare ingredients. It's an incredible textbook. I still reference it to this day. And then from there, I think social media, this is a time when social media really can be used for good, because once you have that foundational knowledge and you can kind of more or less determine accurate information from inaccurate information, although it's getting exceedingly difficult to do so, you can start using social media, and experts that you follow, especially like science educator, science communicator experts. I love following cosmetic chemists on social media. I'm always learning something new from many of them, dermatologists, other skincare experts. There's a lot of other dermatology PAs and NPs that I follow and learn from. So following experts like us on social media is going to help you kind of stay up. And then also the journals. So the dermatology journals, there are oftentimes studies in there that are about cosmeceutical ingredients, not just drugs or medications. Okay, next question. Things to do during clinical year to increase your chances of getting into derm. I think if you know that you love derm, I think do all your clinical rotations in dermatology and mix them around. So don't do 2 rotations with the same dermatologist if your program allows that. If you have 2 or 3 rotations, do all of them in dermatology with different preceptors. That way, not only are you learning a few different approaches to the field, but that's 2 to 3 potential providers that you're kind of in their ear, that you're very interested in the field, so that they can let you know if something opens up in their clinic, or if they have a friend, a colleague that opens up a position in one of their clinics. Also, when you go to apply as a novice or inexperienced provider, you can say, look, I was all in from the get-go. I put all my eggs in this basket because this is how passionate I am. I did 3 rotations in dermatology, et cetera, et cetera. So that's definitely what I would do. Again, even on your primary care rotations, if dermatology is your passion, you can talk to those reps. You can ask the preceptor questions about the dermatologic conditions that they see, just really kind of honing in on that. And every rotation, really, you're going to see dermatology. So just even if you're already set on derm, don't discount how beneficial the other rotations could be, for sure. And this is all stuff that you can communicate in your interview that is going to showcase how passionate you are about dermatology to the potential provider that might be hiring you. Do PA schools have expiration dates for prereqs? Yes, they do. I think my school was 5 years. So I actually did have to retake a couple things that I had taken early on in school, because when I switched majors, it added a year on to my college. So you may have to retake some things, which is unfortunate, but there is an expiration date on those classes. Advice for those who just got their first derm job. Just soak it all in, learn as much as you can. Like, really just be a sponge and understand that there's more than one way to do things, but just figuring out one way is a really good start. Don't get yourself too overwhelmed with all the nuance just yet, because that will come. Really get a good foundation and understanding of the basics. What did they teach you about clean ingredients? So again, we don't get any formal cosmeceutical ingredient education, and certainly not any education on quote unquote clean ingredients, because it's not a regulated term. It really means really nothing in the space. It's kind of a newer concept that has arisen. I don't think anyone in any medical field, whether it be MDs, PAs, I don't know what education estheticians might get in this space about what constitutes a clean ingredient, because I don't think we don't even really know, because there isn't a standardized definition. Difference between NP and PA route. I actually, when I read this question, contacted one of my friends who's a dermatology PA to see if she potentially wants to come on the podcast, because of course I can't speak to what the NP route is like. I can tell you that to become a PA, it's a Master's of Science degree after a bachelor's degree. So usually that bachelor's degree is in biology. I had some psychology majors in my class. Now, you also have to have certain prerequisites, so you may have to add those on to your degree. But I also had like exercise science. You certainly could have a bachelor's in nursing and go to a PA school, but I don't think it's very common for obvious reasons, because you're already on that nursing track. But to become a nurse practitioner, you have to be obviously a nurse. So I know that some nurses go straight to NP school. I would say the great majority work first before they go on to NP school, but that's not always the case. So I'm definitely going to look into having a couple more nurse practitioners on the podcast. I did have Jordan Harper, who's a nurse practitioner. She's also the founder of Barefaced. She's absolutely incredible. So I'll link that episode below. But as far as like the specific differences between NP and PA, I'm definitely looking into having one of my Derm NP friends on to talk about that, so we can kind of riff back and forth and you can understand what the differences were between our experiences. So I hope this episode was helpful for you guys. I really tried to get to as many questions as I possibly could. Again, I do these question and answers once a week on my Instagram, so definitely tune in over there if you want some more answers to the commonly asked questions. And I will see you next week, skin enthusiasts.